Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, while I haven't had a lot of chance to keep up with the news over the last few days here, I, of course, have been keeping an eye on some things on Twitter, and this has been one of the, I think, the bigger stories we've been hearing about, this container ship that's been turned sideways. Doing a little digging here, I did find a couple of interesting things. When the ship got turned sideways in the Suez Canal, which again, we're talking right in through this area is where the Suez Canal is. We did see back a couple of days ago on satellite that there was actually, well, you can see by the cloud view, there's some pretty strong winds and a lot of dust. I know it's not quite showing up to be overly dramatic on the image here, but you can still see quite a bit of dust. But if you go and take a look at some of the winds that they were going through when this was happening, take a look at this. So again, let's just get you oriented. The Suez Canal's right here. Some very, very strong winds blowing that dust around just a few days ago. So maybe there was a bit to be blamed on the weather getting that ship turned sideways. Okay. From there, let's come back over to the United States and let's take a look at this animation. This was the storms from yesterday, so you can see the low coming out of the Texas Panhandle area and watch the storms blow up here in eastern Texas. And the advection of that moisture out ahead of this really pushing into Mississippi, Alabama, getting up toward Arkansas and Tennessee. As these storms erupted yesterday, we did get quite a few hail reports out of these storms and some strong straight-line winds as it eventually built into what seemed like a more linear system here. Maybe we call this a quasi-linear convective system. That would be kind of the official name. See it right here. But then it looked like it gusted out. See the leading edge of the storms breaking away from the remainder of the backside of the storms and kind of gets its legs knocked out from underneath it. Didn't matter though. We still had several reports of severe weather, and most of those reports were hail. In fact, now that I look at it, all of the reports were hail here. Several of these hailstones were quite large yesterday as well. Well, as we take a look at the total accumulated precipitation out of this is just our last 72 hours. And a couple things to point out here. Bringing in the precipitation into this region has been key. Well, maybe I should draw this a little more carefully. Into this area was key because parts of Nebraska are having one of the wettest starts to the year on record here. So now as we take a closer look at this and just kind of see where things are shaken down here moving forward, you can see the evidence here of the storms down south, the flooding that has been in the lower Mississippi River Valley. We got to see where this is all going. But first, just want to give you an updated map here, January 1st through March 25th on total accumulated precipitation rank. So this is out of 129 years. And you can see that parts of Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, and then western Iowa here ranking very, very high. While we still are dealing with the fact that the storm systems have dug too far to the south. They've either come out like this or they've dug even farther and come out like that, avoiding the northern plains, which is where you see our major drought conditions. There's been another issue with this as well, and that has been that this section here of the U.S., kind of to the north of that line I just drew, also very dry to start this year. We're going to be adding quite a bit more precipitation again to the Mid-South. You'll see this in a few moments. And unfortunately, what I had hoped for in being at least some semblance of a miracle March for the West just did not materialize. And we had some decent precip at times, but it was not enough to be corrective on this drought. So take a look at our soil moisture maps here. We can see how dry things are in the northern plains, eastern Montana, especially getting into the Dakotas there. And also getting over into the eastern kind of Great Lakes Basin. That area too is something we're going to be watching carefully. But there's a lot of other moving pieces to this right now, and let's go straight to the upper levels of the atmosphere to show you them. Here is the lead shortwave that is going to initiate this severe weather event. You can even see the high pressure cell to the south that's kind of feeding the moisture into this. We have a broader trough into the west, and what I want you to watch is there's actually a little wave right in through here that's going to emerge in the Four Corner states. And then way up here, this is going to be a system that we're going to watch kind of come down like this and eventually emerge into the Canadian prairie, which is going to be important for returning moisture to that area. But in the meantime, just given this synoptic flow setup, this is what we're dealing with from our all hazards weather map. We can see here that across the United States, we do have flood advisories, flood watch out here. This kind of, I don't know, is it a salmon color or a pink color? That's all high wind. And we have high wind warnings and high wind watches that extend here into this section of the eastern Cornbelt, getting into parts of Pennsylvania. Dense fog early this morning on the East Coast, and you can still see the winter weather advisories in place here in the Cascades and Northern Rockies. and it's also going to be quite windy in Southern California. So there are a lot of things going on right now in terms of this very dynamic pattern, which again, you can see here when we look at the upper level flow. So let's get right into this. The Storm Prediction Center, this is now twice in the same year. Not only that, but twice in the same 8-day time period that we've had the Storm Prediction Center issue a high risk. And just to make a point here, these high risk severe thunderstorm days are quite rare. But let's go ahead and take a look at what we're expecting in this region today, because it does extend up into parts of the Tennessee Valley and Ohio Valley. We got to see what those storms are going to look like. We're going to first take a look at this by examining the 0Z ECMWF view of Cape. So this is moving through middle of the day today and into this evening. So by this evening, the region in through here kind of opens up with some better instability. This, of course, gets up toward the Ohio River Valley. But middle of the day today, you can see down here in parts of Mississippi and Alabama, some of our Cape values are up here in the, above 1,500, approaching 2,000. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what Cape is, it stands for Convective Available Potential Energy. It is essentially a metric we use to understand how quickly the air can rise in the atmosphere. And the faster it rises, the bigger and badder the thunderstorms are going to be. What's aiding this along is the wind shear. So let me just step you back here. This is up about a mile above our heads. And what we're going to be seeing later this afternoon is right in through this area, kind of coming out of this direction, okay? We're going to have some very, very strong winds in the low levels of the atmosphere. And sometimes these winds here might be over 50 miles an hour. We call this the low-level jet. So in other words, if you're kind of feeding, let's just redraw this. If you're feeding the storms with moisture out of the south like this, but then we're screaming over the top of it with winds that are coming out of the southwest, that provides the wind shear necessary to get these storms to rotate. And what we're going to see here is that the high-resolution models, as we go through the early morning into the mid-afternoon, so here we go. This is now through overnight hours last night, so we saw this. This is now early this morning. And as we get into midday today, the concern is that right in through here, we're going to be seeing some of these storms pop up, and they're going to have the potential to take on some rotation. So that's why the Storm Prediction Center is keyed in on this area. Let's continue to play out our simulated radar imagery here. You see later on in the evening the frontal boundary sweeps through, goes through parts of Memphis, cuts into parts of Tennessee, Mississippi. This is this evening, and that tail end of that squall line then kind of slashes through parts of the Mid-South, getting over into the southeast. Meanwhile, as I rock back and forth here in the overnight hours tonight, heavier precipitation on the backside of this coming out of Missouri, going into Illinois. We do have the risk of thunderstorms in this area as well today, so be aware of that late this evening. Potentially some very heavy rainfall out of this system as it rolls on through here. Now, by early tomorrow morning, this is curling up through Michigan and heading toward Ontario, and it will be out in the northeast. But you start to see, just take a look back there at the Four Corners states. Just step you back here. This is now early Friday morning. We now see our next system emerging here. That was that second wave we mentioned a few moments ago, and it comes out in the Central Plains and possibly brings some rain to Iowa. And we still need more in Iowa to kind of make up for some of the longer-term deficits. And I will be looking forward to seeing the new drought monitor today to see how well, or if we got any improvement out of the recent rainfall, because we still have some more that is being forecast. Now, I got to talk to you about these winds at the surface now. We talked about those 850 millibar winds. Well, as this system takes shape, here we are. This is now getting into this afternoon on Thursday and then into the overnight hours, Thursday into Friday morning. That low takes off and goes right, the low pressure center might go right over my house here tonight. I live in near Champaign, Illinois. But what you see here are extremely strong winds wrapped around this quickly deepening low. And the reason for this is there's actually one jet streak in the jet stream here and another here, and tucked in between the two we have exceptional upper level divergence. So this is just going to be a rapidly deepening low, and as it moves through Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, it is going to be producing some very strong winds, and those winds will then move into the northeast. And by the way, if you live near the Great Lakes, remember, the Great Lakes are much smoother than the land surface surrounding them. Reducing that friction allows the winds to really get going quite fast here. So we can look at this another way. This next map is the accumulated wind gusts. So as we kind of move this forward, let's just kind of let it play on out. You can see those reds showing up there. That's where we may have some synoptic scale wind gusts. Just take a look at the color bar here, where we're up here in this 60 to 70 mile an hour range. Now, this is not thunderstorm-based winds. This is just the winds around the low. And so we could expect quite a bit of damage out of these winds. Just as we get into spring, we just think about what our trees went through during winter, for example. And as a result, we could see power outages and problems like that into this area. From this point, let's flip over now to the European model and get a little bit longer term view. So we have system number 1 exiting. Okay. Number 2 is right here. We're watching today, giving us the high risk over parts of the southeast. And then system number 3 is coming into the Pacific Northwest. Let's kind of watch them all move again as we go through the next couple of days. So we've seen this first system exit. We've now watched system number 2 rapidly develop over Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And so that one moves on to the north. There we go. Get that one out. And then here is the third system we're watching. This is now 7 p.m. Friday. Looks like early in the morning on Saturday, again, this is where we could be seeing some showers into this area, maybe some storms as well. And then that pulls on through. There is a lingering boundary, do you see it, that sits over parts of the Mid-South, getting back into the Red River Valley of the South, on which we could continue to see more showers and storms over the weekend here, as that third low very weakly moves through parts of the Great Lakes. But what is interesting to see here is that at that point, that low gets a little bit of extra strength. In other words, the jet stream kind of gives a bit more curvature to it, and we deepen it as we get into Ontario and Quebec. And that frontal boundary once again slides right down here like this. So we could expect to see throughout Saturday night into the day on Sunday, this area getting some showers and storms out of this. Now, remember that system I told you way back in the Bering Sea? It finally makes it over to the U.S. and Canada by early next week. And we see it actually showing up here, moving through the Canadian prairie. And this is an area that is in drought. You can imagine extending the drought that's in the Dakotas and Montana north. It does hit parts of southern Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well. So to have this system roll through, and it's quite deep, we're going to be getting some snow on the backside of this, quite a bit of snow here, right around Highway 16. And then you can see the frontal boundary all the way down here to the south associated with this. It's in that kink in the isobars. So this is next Tuesday right here going into next Wednesday. And we might have to watch carefully along that cold frontal boundary right there for maybe a mix of precipitation with the cooler air on the backside, just depending on the time of day, but more rainfall coming out of this here. So let's put all that together and just take a look at how this precipitation accumulates. So European model, if we just kind of play this forward, there we go. We're now working our way through Friday, getting into the weekend, and now early into next week, you can start to see, if I just kind of rock back, look up there in Canada. That's the precip coming in early next week. If I just stop this out here at a week out, let's pause it right there. What we are going to be watching carefully is you do notice that this is an area that's expected to see pretty heavy rainfall, and this is an area that doesn't want it. There's been exceptionally wet conditions. Notice the back edge of the second system doesn't hit the drier areas that are in the Dakotas, getting into Minnesota and Iowa as well, but could be bringing in quite a bit of heavy precipitation into this area. And if you remember earlier, this is a region that was showing up on not only in the drought monitor, but also showing up in our precip statistics. The split flow in the west just misses California, and that's going to be a continuing theme into the month of April as well. Okay, putting it all together, total precipitation anomalies. Just take a quick snapshot here of what the European model is picking up on those anomalies. And from there, let's get out here and talk about week 2 now. So we're going to look here at upper level heights. So the blues would represent troughs and the reds would represent ridges. So we've already seen the first couple of systems come through. Let's now get into early next week. There's the low that goes through parts of Canada. So we'll have a big warm up out ahead of that in this part of the United States. And then that will sweep a front through. So this will bring in a cool midweek next week time period as this deep trough brings in a cold front. But it's brief, and that's been the name of the game, because as you get out here toward next Friday, we just see the same things happening we talked about. Big ridge builds into Greenland, pushes the trough that was over Greenland back here over to this side of the Arctic. That drops a trough through Alaska and then down here through, almost into the Pacific Northwest. But we broaden out a ridge to start April in the midsection of the United States, and that brings in some warmth, and that also brings in a bit of a stagnant pattern overall. So as I get out here now to, we're out here to the 7th of April, the flow pattern really seems to be favoring, we call this the negative P&A. So there's a ridge in the Gulf of Alaska, really a ridge over the Aleutian Islands. It then dips down here and then comes, back out. Now, when you see this pattern, just remember that if we do have this right, the models at this point, given the weak flow, will likely underdo the precipitation in this area. And let's go talk about that, okay? Because when you look at the week 2 total precipitation anomalies, we do see that much of the country is showing up dry. And the reason why it's doing that is because the flow is weak. We just have weak jet stream level winds, which would kind of tell us there's a weak surface temperature pattern, and the model just can't use that to make a lot of precip. But what I would just tell you is that if the jet stream is in fact coming in like this and then running up over a ridge, this is just going to be an area that we're going to continue to see storm systems come through. So don't look at this and think that it's going to be, overly dry. I will also watch what this might mean for the West Coast as well. Even though we do see a dry anomaly here, you dip a trough into the west in April, and that generally spells better precipitation. So we have a lot to watch in the transition as this then becomes the week 1 forecast, and we'll update you that on Monday. For support in this is the week 2 GFS in precipitation anomalies. A little bit different color bar, but same story here overall. Okay, let's talk temperatures now. Here we are, Thursday's high temperatures compared to normal. And as we slide through this week, we see that we start off big warm sector here in the east, but some cooler air cutting into the Four Corner states where we saw the other day some huge snow coming in through parts of New Mexico. Well, as we rock this forward, there's Friday's high temperatures and departure from normal. Here we get into Saturday. Saturday is going to be quite a nice day in terms of temperatures across much of the United States when you compare them to normal. Working our way into the weekend, there's Sunday. Once again, we see the very warm conditions showing up in the northern plains. There's Monday's temperatures getting into Tuesday and Wednesday. And remember, midweek next week, we knew we had a cool down coming. If we take a look at that time period, this is day 5 through 10, that cooler air does make it over here to the east and to the south. But right behind it, once again, we bring in more mild conditions. And that's also echoed here in the ECMWF, looking at the day 5 through 10 time period. Both models also, as we get into the month of April, broaden out again that larger ridge, keeping in the warmer conditions here. And again, this time of year, in fact, almost every time of year, you can keep a close eye here and relate it to what's going on in Alaska. And so if the troughs are digging in here, they're going to have ridging on this side of the country. European buys into the same pattern. Now, as we wrap this one up, I want to talk about some longer range things. And a big part of the story has to do with the MJO. For the first time in a very long time, we have seen regular behavior of the MJO. Now you say, well, what does that mean? That's where it has this eastward progression going around the diagram, something like that. You can see that historically, look what it's done. It's been bouncing around, cutting into null zone, not really moving in this very nice eastward projection that the models are currently looking at here. Now, there's a few things about this. This is a more mild phase for North America getting over here, whereas these will be some cooler phases here. And the question is, does it come on back around over the next 4 to 5 weeks? To look at that, let's talk precipitation first by going to the European model. Getting out there into the first full week of April, this is the European Ensemble weeklies, and we just see here that through the beginning of April, the model just continues to see that weaker flow and some drier conditions. But as we get out toward middle and end of April, the models do give us a flavor of kind of, getting this area once again quite more active, possibly on severe weather. And as I just let this play on out, you start to notice that as we get into May, here we are at the beginning of May, this is a normal time period for this section of the United States to see a lot of severe weather, as it is for parts of the southern plains. But we do start to see some wetter anomalies showing up here in the models. And the big question will be to monitor this to see if it does start to tighten up some of those early planting windows. Because we certainly see conditions, let's just go take a look at it here. We certainly see conditions favoring more mild weather, even into the start of May. So if I just kind of rock this back and forth here, you see, throughout April, that's what I'm doing here, April into early May, mild conditions. Why we see some cooler weather showing up here, this is about the eastward projection of the MJO going over into phase 8 or possibly into phase 1 or even into phase 2. That would just give us a brief shot at some cooler weather in that area. But the bigger picture to all of this as we get toward the end here is that with the MJO moving, that tells me that La Nina has, look at the Southern Oscillation Index. It needs to be above 7 to be La Nina, and it has crashed down here to -2. Now, this doesn't mean El Nino is forming. This just means that the La Nina has lost its grip. And we can see that. Look at how the ocean temperatures in this area are still cool, but we've lost the strong trade winds. They're not nearly as cool as they were. Now, what I want you to think about here as I wrap this video up is that you see the cooler water that's in place here. the cooler water that is in the Gulf of Alaska, and it extends over toward Japan. There's then a warm tongue tucked away right in this area. Now, this is part of what we call the negative phase of the Pacific meridional mode. And we've been talking about the ocean temperature pattern, but let's get into a bit more of the atmospheric response of this now. The main story is if I see the ocean temperatures in the Pacific plus the warmth in the Atlantic looking like this as we get into May and June, this is a signal for drier conditions in the midsection of the United States and east. Let me show you what I mean. The Pacific meridional mode, feel free to pause the video. I have a diagram of it here every month going back to January 1980. We see that a lot of times these big downward spikes like happened in 1983 here, or right in here 87 and 88, that was an extended time period, or in the early 2000s, and also, well, here's 2012. Okay, these downward spikes have historically been correlated with drier weather in the midsection of the United States. We then had from 2012 on, so this is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, okay? Just counted those out for you. Look at how much time we've spent with the positive Pacific meridional mode. And it's lately just dropped back down like this. And so we're concerned because historically, when you correlate in July and August, the Pacific meridional mode to precipitation patterns, there's a positive correlation. That means if the PMM is positive, it's wetter in this area and drier in the west, but we don't have that right now. We're going into negative values. So what you can think of is this would mean that there would be, according to this one metric, drier conditions here. And so as we see more long-range model support coming out, this is the discussion we need to be having, all right? Okay, we covered a lot today. I'm going to stop right there. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you very soon. Thanks.